Welcome to the unexplored territories of Paranormal M. Subscribe, tap the notification bell, drop a comment, and join us on a quest for the extraordinary. Our latest mind-bending tales await. We hope you're ready for an adventure that defies explanation. Paranormal stuff all of a sudden. I'm a 20-year-old female. So to explain things, this is a real event that happened yesterday. Nothing too drastic, but still extremely weird. The reason I'm writing this is because my parents had some small paranormal stuff when someone died, like loved ones saying goodbye, but still not like this. I came home yesterday, went to my room, and relaxed. Mostly browsing through social media. The only light was in my room. For context, I live in a country where theft is non-existent. Also, my parents were outside working, so they could hear anybody who would enter. So fast forward, I was laying in bed, and I see someone peeked like 3 times exactly. They were checking on me, and then the door closing. I didn't pay much attention since I thought it was my mom just checking on me in my room. Also, the hallway where the person or thing was checking on me was dark. But I'd probably see a figure if there was a person. I left my room to ask my mom why the fuck she was checking on me 3 times and not saying a word to me. I left my room, to be honest, to say that, to show her some random funny meme. So I called for her and nothing. I saw the second door to the house half open, so I figured she left the house to go outside. I go to the other door and start going outside. They're locked. I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't, mostly because the key was left inside and you had to enter. When outside, I asked my parents why the fuck they were checking on me and locked the door. Both started to argue why the other one's lying and who was in the house. Turns out, none of them were. My brain didn't register immediately. I didn't hear any footsteps, and my dog, who usually reacts to somebody in the house, didn't. After my mom came to the house, she found a window fully open. They wouldn't open it. They claimed that it didn't because it's winter. The drawer was fully open. That all wouldn't scare me if my mom didn't tell me that today her light that she didn't turn on started flashing randomly. To be honest, kind of scared and made everything worse. Also, my parents are freaked out too and still don't know what the heck happened. Do we need a priest or a medium is in question? Might not be an exciting story, but I'm still thinking about the fact that something was looking at me. I didn't really react at the moment. My prison ghost story. I worked as an officer at a prison, and although I've moved on to a new facility, I've been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I've learned is how to retain and recall details, which helps recount events that I witness. This makes report writing much easier, and is helping me recount these events here. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state, and it was built in the 1870s. It was in an old style with like a brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas are still operated, had little done to them since it was built. When I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given that everybody who had died over the years. Different places were more than others, like the old unit was the segregation, or what some people might know as the hole. Had all the prison graffiti. I never gave it much thought, because I don't really experience it. It's just a cool story, but not confirmed. First experience. I worked there for 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one. This is where you have to watch a prisoner who's feeling suicidal, make sure that they don't kill themselves. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes. I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes, so I knew I was awake. It was about 2 a.m. I had just used my flashlight to illuminate the cell of the prisoner I was watching, confirmed that he was indeed breathing. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard. I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turn and I see someone doing a round on the housing unit, but he isn't right. This guy's wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap, shiny black leather belt, has a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used in my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms aren't blue, they're gray and modern, whereas this one was old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds. Then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure I was awake. When I looked back, there wasn't anyone there. Second experience. This one happened roughly 2 years later during my normal shift. The central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called the Rotunda. It has 2 floors, but it's open so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anybody who's leaving the Rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off of the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows also. It was maybe 2100 hours. I was going to the Rotunda to complete some paperwork with a coworker of my sergeant, which is pretty common. As we were opening the open barred gate into the Rotunda, I looked up and noticed that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dimmed through the window in the door. I commented to my coworker that we would need to report that light was out to the administration wing. It was then, as we were both looking at the window, that we observed something more in the window, and we realized that this was not a light malfunction. A shadow person was standing in front of the window. While we were watching the shadow move to its left and through a solid wall and into another room, we saw its silhouette through the window of that room. We just looked at each other and kept going. Third experience. I was about 3 years in as an officer by the point that this one happened. I was working the third shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures. Also, there are several rifle posts around the prison perimeter that are used to ensure the security of the prison, but we only ever use 3 of them during the operational hours. In this case, it's important to know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center, so that way we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in that area, which is important in case we're dealing with a staff assault or a hostage situation. So, I'm working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means that the camera controls are my main responsibility, along with the perimeter security. As I'm working, the phone rings, and an institutional caller ID says, 1 post, which is odd because that post is not used because it's too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside it. Also, at this time, there's nobody that should be near it, and for someone to reach it, it'd have to be set off at least 2 security alarms, which I was in charge of monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I figured it was just him playing a prank, and that he knew a way around the sensors. So I answer the phone and I hear the static, which is continuously increasing and decreasing in volume like somebody has an old television on a static-filled channel. like it's moving volume up and down constantly. I hang up the phone, move the camera to look at the post, and I can see right inside there's no one there. As I'm looking at it, the phone rings again, and it says one post. This time, my lieutenant picks up the phone and after a minute walks back to me, asking if the perimeter officer is playing games, as he can hear mumbling blurred out by static from the one-post phone. He sees that I have a camera pointed right at it and that there's no one there. The lieutenant tells me to have the perimeter officer check it out. Maybe an animal may have gotten to the post and knocked the phone off the hook. The officer took a while to get there, as he had been on the other side of the perimeter. He had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get there. During this time, the phone had continued to ring from one post until I could see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone stops ringing. The officer opens the door with his flashlight on and calls over the radio that there's not a phone in the post. My lieutenant responds that there must be one because the calls keep coming through. In response, the officer holds up a disconnected phone line so that the camera can see it and says that this is the only thing in the post. This post hasn't been used since like the early 80s, and like I said, it was too small of a space. The phone would still ring now and again on a third shift until we updated our phone system to the internet-based system. Fourth experience. I had been an officer for about 4 years at this point. I was working my regular shift as an electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which means I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I'm in the restroom, I distinctly hear the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway that leads to the restroom among other rooms in that wing. As the sounds get closer to the restroom, I can hear the large Folger keys. They're clinking together on their waist as they walk. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out saying, I'll be out in a minute. I didn't hear the sounds after I said that. Thinking someone was waiting outside, I hurried up and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. I opened the door, and there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has 3 entry doors, and I would have heard them open or close as well as any other door in the hallway, to where they would have had issues getting out of the hallway noiselessly in the time between me calling them and leaving the room. I returned to my post. I asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said he didn't and asked why, knowing that he was somebody who believed in ghosts, given that he and I had talked about how he used to do independent paranormal investigations. I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large as he said, "Go check the video." I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway. The hallway of the wing above that one and the areas outside the wing. No one was in that area during that time except for me, and no signs of distortions. Fifth experience. I'd been an officer for about 6 years, and I was working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the dinner lines. They were done. My sergeant was talking with me. Not like a management thing. We were kind of friends. We just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring the prisoners weren't passing meds, fighting, or anything worse. The medical hallway I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda and the other end of one of the main housing blocks, specifically right next to our main segregation unit. As we were talking, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our radio, we realized that this was not us. We began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was like a security issue and some kind of concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find it transmitting sound at all. The sergeant points out it and says, "Must be broken. Switch is in the off position. Activation lights off." I looked closely and I got goosebumps as I made a shocking discovery saying, "Sarge, how is it doing that when it's not plugged in?" I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box and gave it a slight tug to show it was attached directly to the box. The sergeant's face went white as he walked off, shaking his head saying, "Nope, nope, nope." These intercoms don't have backup batteries. There's no direct power hookups, just the cord that had already shown that was disconnected. The sounds continued for the duration of the medication lines. I left the area after that. I never heard of it doing that again. What did we see? This is a story from a friend and I, and something that we saw 7 years ago. It was the week of my birthday, November 2nd, 2017. And as I shared a birth date with one of my gamer friends, we decided to have a weekend birthday party that would take place from the 3rd to the 5th. One of my friends had to go to work that Friday and work for a couple of hours before he could come back. But he didn't drive. I offered to drive him there and back, as he was a very good friend. Didn't want him to miss the first night of TTRPGing. Also, since I had reached an age where I wasn't drinking as much as I did in my early 20s, he worked as a floor cleaner in a chain store, home state of Michigan. It was 20 miles away from my house, so I was fine with just waiting in my car with my book. Please keep these points in mind for anyone questioning how much detail I go into. I work in the criminal justice field, and I'm trained to observe and retain details about notable events. I'm still able to recall critical events from 12 years ago with great detail. Also, well, my friend was present and confirmed everything that I saw. He may not work in the criminal justice field, but he did go to college focused on it, and he's a great observer, often noticing things that all of our friends miss. It was 2 in the morning when we drove to his job. Being the gamers and sci-fi fantasy fans that we are, our conversations were filled with our geekiness the whole way up. Driving north along the Michigan highway, we didn't see anything other than some white-tailed deer movement, which in the rural area of Michigan is not out of the ordinary, and it seems to be another fall night with a relatively open sky. My friend went to work while I read my book with nothing abnormal happening. I sat there. We came out a couple of hours later and we set back to my place. We'd been driving and talking further about various geeky topics until we began driving up this hill. We just seemed to have an awkward silence between us. In the middle of our conversation, I specifically remembered thinking something was off as we reached the crest of the hill. At the crest of the hill is a house on the passenger side of the road with a mailbox and a guardrail which leads from the base of the hill up to the driveway, because there's a crazy ditch on the other side of the rail. As we were about 50 yards from the driveway, I saw it standing there by the side of the road. I could see the brown legs, torso, and antlers. I specifically remember thinking that the deer looked huge. In the back of my mind, thinking I should find out who owned the property near there. Maybe go hunting near the area. But as we reached the crest of the hill, I realized that this was not a white-tailed deer. This thing was standing on 2 legs with what would have been its front legs hanging at its sides as a human would have as their arms. The head was also wrong, as it didn't seem to have a snout, and its face was just covered by hide with its green glowing eyes facing toward us. Its antlers were sitting on top of a human-shaped skull, which perch is not where they sit on a deer's head. This thing was massive, standing between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. Very broad. I was sort of gauging this off of the scale against my car as I drove by it in comparison to my size. I drove a 2008 Chevy Impala, and I'm 6 feet tall. My abdominals were aligned with the window, and I was standing outside when we were right next to this thing. I saw its legs at knee level. I managed to keep driving onward without issue, and my friend and I continued in silence for nearly a mile when he finally turned to me and said, "Did you just..." he asked before I cut him off, saying, "Yeah." He brought it up. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, and he continued, "You know, that could be..." I cut him off again, and I said, "I really don't want to talk about it." We stopped talking about it and continued for the next 10 miles in silence till we reached my house. We went to bed even though some of our friends were still up, but I did not sleep well the rest of the night. It should be said that I grew up in this 4-county area and have been traveling these roads at all hours of the day and night my entire life, especially the one that we had taken, which I traveled at least twice a week at roughly the same time frame. I have extensive experience with Michigan wildlife and have acted as nighttime deer spotter for my family since I was old enough to see over the dash. I've hunted since I was like 10 years old, and I've killed many deer. And as is pretty common in my area, I've been the victim of car-deer accidents more than once in my life. If anyone thinks it was a person doing a prank, you can factor that percentage down to 0. It's near the end of bow hunting season at that time, and no one outside of town and cities would dare dress as a deer, much less by the road. I also discussed this with my friend before posting this, and our descriptions of the events matched. We don't talk about this much. We don't see each other often anymore. I was used to staying up till dawn, so it wasn't me being tired. Why did it seem we had entered a sort of trance? I've seen blood spurting out of someone's open neck and not missed a beat as I applied pressure waiting for an ambulance. Why did it bother me so much? What was it? The Wendigo? A skinwalker? A not deer? Or something else? The questions still haunt me along with the anxiety I feel every time I walk into the woods. Haven't seen it since, and I hope I never do. The Locksmith's Prison Ghost Story. Normally, the first thing that gets built in every prison, along with the foundation, is the tunnel system. This has been the case even back into the 1800s, given the fact that my old prison had it running under the whole place. What the original purpose was back then, I don't know, but now they're used as emergency escapes during a critical incident, and for critical systems access. The maintenance staff at prisons are very diverse in specialties, from heating and cooling technicians to electricians to locksmiths. As the place relies on locks to keep prisoners in the facility, you can imagine the facility locksmith is normally busy. Here's the story. Bob had just finished fixing the holding module's lock for the 3rd time this month. The repeated use of the lock caused it to fill with metal shavings that would eventually jam the mechanism, and he'd need to swap it out with a spare and repair the one that he removed. The toolkit gripped in one hand and the lock in the other, Bob proceeded down the secured stairwell that led to the lock shop next to the facility arsenal. Reaching the bottom of the stairwell, he set the lock in his toolbox while he struggled with his keys to find the proper one to open the door that allowed him into the hallway. Struggling with the door, which was assisted closing with considerable weight, he finally managed to open the door and walk through. The hallway was dimly lit, more out of expense than function, and linked the arsenal, the lock shop, the emergency tunnels, and the emergency exits. The exits were linked to the arsenal and the lock shop directly to allow immediate egress, and the tunnel had a simple metal gate with an oval diamond pattern that allowed you to see through it. 15 feet past the door of the tunnel, the lighting became so bad you could barely see anything. Bob waited for the door to shut all the way, looking at it as it did, until he heard the lock audibly click. Then checked to make sure it was secure by testing the handle and pushing against the door. Finding it secure, he turned and began to cross the hallway to his lock shop door. When the damaged lock tumbled off the toolbox, it clattered onto the concrete floor with a loud ringing clang that reverberated through the hallway and down the open tunnel. Shaking his head at how forgetful he was being Bob, he bent at the waist, picked up the lock. Grabbing the lock with his free hand and rising, he found himself standing only 5 feet from the gate that he stood in front of the tunnel. As he looked up from the lock he had just recovered, and he saw what looked initially like a swinging maintenance light. The tools were used frequently down in the tunnels, and the catwalks around the whole prison, really. It was cheaper to give everyone in maintenance a portable light that attached to the electrical outlets than it was to put proper lighting in every nook and cranny. Looking closer and approaching the gate, he realized that it was not a maintenance light. The light was orange like a flame, not yellow-white like their maintenance lights. As Bob looked closer, shielding his eyes from the nearby ceiling light, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the dark as he heard the creaking sound of a metal hinge echoing in the distance. Thinking that possibly something may have broken loose down in the tunnel, he set down his toolbox and the lock as he began to grab for his keys, still looking down the tunnel. As he found the key to the gate, Bob realized he could see a figure down in the light. Breathing a sigh of relief, he began to take in a deep breath to yell down the other maintenance man down the tunnel, but he stopped short as he got a clear look at him. The light wasn't an open flame or a maintenance light. It was an old 1800s-style lantern, and it seemed to move in time with the metallic hinge creaking sound. The man holding the lantern appeared to be very white and wearing striped clothes. Backing away from the gate in shock, Bob watched the figure fade away like a fog lifting off the ground when the sun rises. Music coming from the forest. There's this forest close to my house that I often walk in, alone or with my family. It was being used in World War II, so there are a few military bunkers around. The forest is quite long, and there aren't many houses around. In some areas there are none. Now, this first encounter with the strange forest was about a year ago. I was walking, going a bit further than I usually would alone. I explored a bit, then walking back. There was this large field I passed. It had a bunker in it. I took a look. In it were a couple of roe deer bones and some half-smoked cigarettes. Nothing out of the ordinary. This was one they'd forgotten to close up, so you could go inside. There's nothing strange or out of the ordinary in the bunker either. I left it and continued walking. Keep in mind that this was one of those areas where there's no houses nearby. I walked and suddenly my heart dropped. I heard music, very clear, vintage-sounding music like from the 20s or 30s. I was terrified. I walked further thinking it was my imagination, but it wasn't. To continue on the regular path, I had to climb a little hill that was quite muddy. But I couldn't get on it. I had to keep walking through the field without the path. I was so scared I thought there was someone hiding in the trees waiting for me. There wasn't. I took out my phone, took some videos, and sent them to my friend. She could hear it too. I walked home, but I thought it was just a weird coincidence. but last week it happened again. A twig snapped and the music started playing when I was walking back home. Same exact place. I ran back home, which took about 20 minutes. It was the same music. I saw a shadow person. Okay, so I hosted Christmas at my apartment. After my family left for Christmas, I stayed up and cleaned while my mom went to bed. I have a screwed up sleeping schedule. I've been staying up until 4 a.m., so I figured to get tired, I should just clean the kitchen, dishes, and living room. As I was done cleaning the kitchen, I looked at the reflection of my sliding glass door. There was a shadow figure of a man in front of my Christmas tree, and it was looking directly at me. I looked away and started telling myself I was just seeing things because I'm tired and smoked weed. So I must have thought something in the living room resembled a young man's figure. I went to the living room to start cleaning up and felt this weird energy. I was uncomfortable. It felt like someone was watching me. I quickly grabbed my gifts, and before I went into my room, I looked again at the sliding door, and I swear to God I saw the shadow of a young man, but this time looking at me from his side. I screamed, ran inside. Now what the hell do I do? Am I just crazy, or am I making this up in my head? How do I get him to leave? He's scaring the shit out of me, whoever he is. Also, I have 3 cats. One of my cats was staring at the direction the man was looking at me. Now they're all currently in my room, and I don't want to go outside my room. The same cat that was looking at him also begged to come inside my room by meowing loudly. Help, I'm scared. LOL. Hunting report. Ancient giant presence in Papua New Guinea. Over the festive season, my daughter persuaded me to post one of my stories from my early years on your platform. To be completely frank with you, some of the questions I'm about to raise here are still bothering me to this day. So, anyway, this story is about hunting. At the time, I was 17 and living in Papua New Guinea. It's a large archipelago in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. My parents were French, but I was born in Papua New Guinea. I spent my entire childhood surrounded by native Papuans. I considered them my brothers, and they considered me one of theirs. One of my friends was a boy my age. We called him Cam. He lived in my neighborhood, and we were in the same class for a long time, so we were very close. And I say were because we haven't seen each other in a very long time. He and I shared a passion for hunting and fishing. We spent our weekends in the lush woods behind my house chasing small prey and birds. I've amassed an enormous number of memories and hunting stories, and experiences, as many laugh-out-loud moments were painful and frightening ones too. We've also gathered a lot of experience and equipment. During these hunting trips, the peak of the excitement, the real trophy, was the big prey, and in particular the deers. But they were rare in the small wood that bordered our neighborhood, and you'd barely ever see any. To find one, you really had to go deep into the jungle. So during the holidays, we'd ask Cam's big brother to give us a lift in his 4x4, and he'd accompany us on our expeditions into the prehistoric flora and fauna. This time, Cam's older brother had guided us to a hunting area I'd never been to before. We arrived very early in the morning, armed really, and equipped ourselves. Set off into the jungle in silence. To describe the atmosphere, the inside of the jungle is like a burning oven. We were forced to wear nothing but our underwear because it was so hot. The air was also extremely humid, with drops constantly falling from the trees even if it wasn't raining. The ground was made of slimy, sticky mud. Not to mention all the insects and vegetation that constantly irritated our skin. Hell on earth, but it was really fun. You could also hear the monkeys calling and the birds singing through the forest. There was never a moment's silence. We concentrated on listening to the animals' footsteps, following their tracks in the mud, picking up any dung we came across, and vigilantly observing our surroundings. That day we wanted to go deeper into the jungle. To my surprise, my two friends took an abnormally long detour that made no sense to me. We were wasting time and energy when the primary forest was practically, impracticable. But I thought they knew the area better than I did, and the landscape I was seeing was magnificent, so I didn't say anything. After 4 or 5 hours of walking, we came to a watering hole, which looked like a heavenly little swamp. It was a good sign, so we stopped, had a drink, then hid, rifle in hand. After 40 minutes of silence, perhaps an hour, a pair of deer appeared near the waterhole. Feeling the excitement and adrenaline pumping, I slowed my heart rate and took aim at the buck. Then the three of us fired in chorus, made a terrifying bang, a triple rifle shot that instantly struck down the prey. All the animals in the vicinity scurried off and all the local birds flew away. All the animals in the vicinity, all of a sudden, silent. And by the way, I'm not an animal sadist, and violence isn't my favorite thing about hunting, but I have to admit that seeing the deer fall into our hands gave us pretty great joy. Then we tied up the animal's legs to carry it to the 4x4, but instead of taking the most direct way and clipping through the area, Cam headed off in the direction of a detour. I argued that there was no point and that would be wasting our time. Then Cam responded with a bewildering answer. He said, "Our traditions forbade us to pass through these lands because it was here that our ancestors killed the last giant." His tone was serious and sort of solemn, and his eyes betrayed neither lies nor humor. I didn't try to argue any further, and we headed back to the 4x4 via the diversions. At the time, I was really surprised by this mystical response. Then I was able to relate it to another story I'd heard from another native Papuan, Vieli, the sister of a friend of mine. As part of her job, she had to terraform a parcel of land that was in a forest in order to build houses. When she and her team were excavating the ground to build the foundations, they made an outstanding discovery. 4 human skeletons, the largest one 5 meters tall. Naturally, they called in a paleoanthropology consultancy from France. Scientists and soldiers arrived in a hurry the next day. They strictly forbade access to the area to anybody who wanted to go near it. A few days later, the scientists left, taking the bones with them and assuring Vieli that the other witnesses that the incident had never really happened. That's all I really had to say. I haven't managed to get to the bottom of this mystery, which the islanders find hard to talk about, by the way. I've done a bit of research into them, and some legends claim that these giants were the result of crossbreeding between a human race and an extraterrestrial race known as the Nordics. The tall blondes, or the Elohims of the Bible. Do what you like with this information. Also, I've never seen any giants myself, but the people around me believe in their existence very hard, and the legends do circulate. My grandpa came to me in a dream. I do believe there is a God, at the least. All this said, when my grandpa died, I didn't go to the funeral or viewing. I don't go to these events, if that's what you call it. I'm just not comfortable with them. The day after the funeral, he came to me in a dream. And if you're like me, your first thought is, well, it's a dream. This time, though, was different. It's hard to explain, but it was something you feel. He had the same type of clothes he always wore. I could smell his distinct scent, and everything felt subtle and warm. Kind of like when a big light casts on you and you feel its heat. He told me it was okay that I didn't go, and that he understood why. Everything was so vivid and crystal clear. I've never had a dream with such detail, not even remotely. The vast majority of the time, I don't remember my dreams. The times that I do, I try to remember it, but after 10 minutes or so, it's all faded away. It's been several years since then, and I still remember this dream, much of its detail. This has been probably my only experience in a somewhat paranormal event. There's only one other dream I had. I kind of question it, but since I sort of sit on the fence, I just learned to not. Something keeps appearing as my husband. I have something in my house, and I've no clue what it is. I call it a mimic. Starting in 2022, my husband and I would hear our voices calling each other. It would happen at random, and after a while, we just stopped paying attention. 2023. I'm starting to see what I imagine it is. It appears as my husband. The first time it was standing in front of his door with his back to me and his hand up as he was locking the door, but he wasn't moving, just frozen. I ignored it because, well, thought he was trying to creep me out. Went to the bedroom where he was sitting. I freaked but moved on because what else am I supposed to do? More times happened, like coming in and having him laying in bed facing away from me. I lay down with my back to him on the phone. Felt him shift, then felt a light touch on my hair. I turned and it was just a pile of blankets. Now here's where I'm getting scared. In September, I opened the bathroom door, surprised that he was just standing there with his hand to his stomach. I went to apologize and he said, "Something's wrong with my stomach." I said I'd go get the medicine. When I came back, he was gone. So I went in his room and he was watching TV. I tried to give him the stomach medicine. He said he never asked. I told him what happened and the shock on his face is stuck in my head. He said he wasn't in the bathroom, but did say to himself something was wrong with his stomach. He's been so many appointments trying to figure out what it is and still no answers. Hopefully soon, though. Has anyone dealt with something like this? I truly am just trying to figure this out. I'm not asking for belief. I'd truly love to find science behind this, but I just can't figure what would be realistic about this. You never really believe until it happens to you. This happened in early February of 2005 in Concord, Virginia. Like my title, I wasn't a true believer until I saw what I saw. Even though it was almost 20 years ago, it's something I think about often. It's like my whole life changed in the matter of 5 seconds. Since then, I've become somewhat sensitive to things I can only explain as the supernatural. So let me set the scene. I was a super young mother to my first daughter, who would turn 1 that month. We used to live on this old kind of curvy road where one end brings you to Lynchburg and the other to Appomattox. Like every morning back then, I was heading to Lynchburg. But of course, I was speeding to make time to go to work for, supposed to be there at 5 a.m. There was this part of the trip where it has a super sharp curve that when it would sort of like snake, and it would be uphill at the end of the snake. There would always be huge packs of deer in this area, so you literally go 5 miles an hour with all the curviness. This strip of road didn't have any houses for at least 3 miles each way. Even though it was 20 years ago, I still remember every single little detail. Like the outside temperature was 17 degrees. To Usher's Confessions Part 2 was on the radio, with the time being 4:43 a.m. I remember the Vanilla Tree car freshener. Bro, I even remember what underwear I had on. I'm sorry, but it's just nuts I even remember that stuff. I was speeding until I got to the top of the snake, slowed to a basic crawl. But as I was entering the top of the snake, Usher started coming in and out of the speakers while my whole dash was slowly dimming. Of course, I had a mini panic attack thinking my car was dying, but I was confused because I still had plenty of power when I stepped on the gas. By the second curve, I got the most intense feeling I've ever had in my life at this point. I can only explain it as pain, or sadness, fear, coldness, and just the feeling of being lost. All I could do was bawl my eyes out, like a full-grown woman crying like a baby. And as I reached my last curve before the uphill, I saw him. I saw him leaning against the hill that was right next to the road. I first noticed his bare feet with his gray tattered pants. Wait, it's the middle of the winter. Where are his shoes? Was my first thought. But then I saw his gray, thin, strange jacket, one I've never seen like that before in my life. As I slowly made my gaze to his face, I realized he didn't have a face, but rather just a shadow. I literally could make out every other detail but his face. It was just gone. You know how if you're going slow enough and you hit your brakes, the red light can kind of see what's behind you in the mirrors? Well, this guy was just gone. And so, wasn't all of those emotional I had 2 seconds ago. I made it to work with only being 2 minutes late. And that day after work, I decided to walk around the downtown Lynchburg historical building. Something I've never done in the 5 months I've worked there. That was the day I learned what the Civil War soldiers actually looked like. And I also discovered my road was used as a trail to Appomattox. Appomattox? That is a very cool name. Bizarre word. I also had no clue when a soldier would die, they would steal anything useful off of the fallen soldiers. I know what I saw that day, but I can't tell who or what side that soldier came from, because even though I thought I'd seen the color gray, it was really just a ghost. Did they even really have colors? Doppelgangers. My 3+ experiences with doppelgangers. I was in Boston, and swear to God, I saw my brother and his now wife walking downtown, literally right in front of the high-rise my brother works in. I called him, and he said they were home, but it was weird. Like 20 minutes later, I was almost in a really bad 3-way accident with speeds up 60 miles an hour, basically. By some miracle, none of us made contact with each other. I was dumbfounded. And to make things even weirder, On the way back from Boston, I saw someone with their foot on the left side guardrail like they were about to climb over onto the highway. The only problem was that they looked like an actual zombie. Not like a disheveled man, but like a zombie with purple and an almost demonic face. I only saw him or it for a split second. Did I see the entity that pretended to be my brother? It's an honest question. In my hometown, me and my brother's doppelgangers had been seen around town. Someone said they saw my brother, like exactly, but with dead eyes. Someone at Dunkin' Donuts told me I had just been there. Same looking person with a navy hat and the same exact kind of car. Even weirder than all that, a few years ago, my best friend's grandmother got a call from my friend. The only problem was that the call was coming from the Dominican Republic, an island along with Haiti, which is well known for voodoo. Is my friend a changeling? But seriously, in voodoo, one ritual is creating zombies by stealing their souls in a dark magic ritual ceremony. We've all heard of a supernatural entity called a shapeshifter. Haunted hotel. So my partner and I love to make, well, a weekend out of our minor trip. Just to get away and get a hotel somewhere new. This time around, we went up to Richmond, Virginia. I'd never been there before and wasn't really too aware of the history. Never paid attention in history class. Well, we finally get there. We got a hotel in the historic downtown area near the Capitol building. Cool. Walking up to our hotel, I got an eerie feeling from it, but I shook it off as general anxiety. Our room was creepy. Couldn't really shake the feeling that this was a very old hotel, most likely had a ghost in it. So I looked it up but didn't find anything solid. I get over it, and we leave to explore the city. That night we're falling asleep, no alcohol or drugs involved, and the room is just dark. I'm a little bit psycho because I sleep with my feet outside of the covers, and do this every night. Think I'm asleep, but I still feel like I'm awake. A weird, in-between. This is when I feel someone wrap their left hand around my right foot and tighten. I jerk all the way awake, pull my foot back, look around the room. No one's there. Now I'm freaked out, but I try to just play it cool. Tell myself I'm dreaming, go to sleep. In all of my dreams, there was a male following me around, begging me to help him get to the dreamland. I kept telling him that I couldn't help him. The next morning, I tell my partner about the foot grab and the crazy dreams, and his face goes white. I ask what's wrong. He says, felt like I was asleep, but I felt someone push me on my shoulders. I also then had a dream of a male getting in my face. Needless to say, I'm not going back to Richmond. About 10 years ago, I had a dream that still gives me the chills every single time I think about it. Important backstory information. A friend of mine passed away when he was 19 from a sudden illness. His name was Kevin. A few years after he passed, my boyfriend and I moved in with a friend who's Kevin's best friend. We shared a one-room bedroom apartment, and both had our beds in the same room. Rent is expensive in your early 20s, okay? So one night I was asleep and dreaming. Can't remember the beginning of it, but my dream suddenly changed. It got really bright, and I was walking up a set of stairs leading to an apartment door. I opened the door, and there was Kevin, sitting on the couch in the living room of this brightly lit apartment. I said hi to him and sat down on the other couch facing him. He said hi back, smiling. I started asking him how he was, and that we all missed him. He said he was great, and that he missed us too, that he's keeping an eye on us for where he is. Anytime I asked him about where he was, he would say that he can't talk about it, or that he had to leave. I said we don't have to talk about it. He said we shouldn't be sad about his sudden passing, and to live our lives and be happy, love one another, things like that. After a couple of minutes, I suddenly woke up. It's the middle of the night, and I looked around the room. My boyfriend was snoring away, and my roommate was asleep in his bed. I tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't shake the feeling that Kevin was somehow still in the room, as if something was watching me. The dream just felt too real. While Kevin looking around the room, I said, "Kevin?" out loud. My roommate's head lifted off of his pillow suddenly, and he turned around to face me. He said, "Did you just say Kevin?" I responded with something like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Just had a strange dream about him." He froze and then said, "I had a dream about him too." I asked him what happened in his dream. He had the same dream at the exact same time. There might be a ghost in our house, and we need help. Okay, so me, a 15-year-old female, and my twin sister Sophia were both in our beds tonight to go to sleep. This is when I started to hear footsteps, very heavy ones. So I texted her and asked what the hell she was doing since it was just me and her in the house. Our parents are out of town. She replied with, "I'm in bed, dumbass." I called her a liar, so she sent me a picture of her in bed. The footsteps were going all around the house in a circle for 20 more minutes. I decided to ignore it because, I don't know, maybe it was just the house shifting. About 30 minutes later, Sophia texts me, saying that she heard a light switch turn on and then off 3 times. I told her that maybe it was a good idea that she come sleep in my room because I was genuinely freaking out. She told me that she was too scared to move, so I got up and ran to her room, shutting the door behind me and turning on the light. When I got into the bed with her, things just got weirder. The footsteps started up again after 10 minutes of me being in her room, the same route that we've been taking before into the kitchen and down into the living room and back around the hallway that leads to my room and my sister's room, and then it repeats. We keep hearing light switches clicking on and off all around the house. The heat is kicking on and off like someone's messing with the thermostat. And it's also normally very warm in my sister's because she has 2 heat vents in the room, but it's freezing in here now. And every once in a while, we'll feel a breeze go through, but no windows are open. We also are hearing tapping on our bathroom door and on the walls, and it sounds like somebody opened the cleaning closet near the kitchen. Both too scared to move. We don't know anything about paranormal stuff, so we're trying to Google some things, but nothing's helping. So we decided to get up and search the whole house together. Didn't find anything, though. Again, we have no experience with this type of stuff. So please, somebody help us. Anything would help. The ghost in our basement. Hi. Okay. So me and my sister basically never sleep downstairs. Nothing really happens in the basement. It's normally just upstairs, like light switches turning on and off, and we hear footsteps when we're alone. But in the last few days or so, a lot has been happening in the basement that we cannot explain. Okay, so basically me and my sister were scared to sleep upstairs alone because we kept hearing footsteps and stuff like that, and our parents weren't home at the time, so it was late. So we went downstairs, and it was normal for about an hour, but then things started to be weird. When we played some music, the lights started flickering, and then just turned off completely, which we thought was just an electrical problem, so we brushed it off. Then my sister made a joke saying, "Imagine if it's just like a ghost." Then the light turned back on right after she finished saying that, so she asked if it was a ghost, and the light turned off again. We started to get weirded out, so we just turned off the light and went to sleep. The next morning we woke up to a phone call. Felt like it was vibrating the whole room. It was neither of our phones, and her dad and mom were at work. We didn't recognize the ringtone. We freaked out and jumped up and ran over to our friend's house and called her mom. She called the police. They searched our entire house and no one was there. Our family has no idea what to do. Graveyard stories from Dad. Anyway, my dad was a wild card when he was young. Thought a spooky graveyard was the ideal date spot like most people back in those days. 1. The Bull's Lament. There was once a farmer who had a prized bull in life. The farmer loved the bull so much that when he died, he wanted the bull to be killed and buried beside him. He also wanted a monument of the proud bull placed over their graves to watch over them for all eternity. Most folk during that time thought the farmer was crazed for thinking of such a wish, yet that didn't stop them from honoring his wish. When the farmer passed, the bull was put down, placed right beside him. The monument was then placed over them just as the farmer had wished. I'm not sure how many years went by until my dad's experience, so I apologize for not having any idea when it happened. Possibly when he was early to mid-20s. My dad liked to hang out in the nearby graveyard with several of his friends. It was like their own playground where they could play army men and pranks. On one night in particular, he and one of my uncles were just relaxing until they heard it. The sound of a bull crying out, either in anger or in anguish. They looked at one another, decided to see where it came from. They followed the noise to the monument only to find nothing. It was then that they heard the bull roar somewhat nearby before the sound of charging hooves running toward them. Dad said they ran the hell out of that graveyard and back to their car. The Man in a Top Hat and Cape. Another story my dad told me happened when he and one of my uncles took their dates to the graveyard. They parked their car in one of the turnoffs and proceeded to make their own lover's lane. Things were getting serious when one of their dates noticed a green fog begin surrounding the car. All four of them sat frozen, watching the mist grow even further in thickness. Soon they began to hear strange thuds striking the car. It was then that Dad decided to turn the key, get out of there as soon as possible. He was then surprised to find a man dressed in a top hat and a cape standing directly in front of their car, smiling at them. The thudding on the car began to become even worse, scaring the dates further. Dad hit the gas pedal, drove forward directly toward the man, hoping that he would move out of the way. Instead of moving, the man stood still, allowing the car to drive through him. Dad stopped the car some distance past where the man stood, looked through the back window. To his surprise, he saw the man still standing there unharmed with the same grin. The man began to gesture for Dad to try again, but Dad decided to just drive out of there for several miles in silence. Ghostly Mischief. This here's my story of incidents that caused my family a certain degree of trouble. When I was a teenager, a long time ago, still living at home, my mom got on a long kick about some silverware going missing. She was somebody who not only was, impatient, but didn't suffer fools at all. To save money for a house purchase, we were living in a 1900s 4-apartment building. My mom kept her kitchen cabinets and drawers well organized. She was always in a rush, and if kitchen utensils weren't handy, she got anxious. At some point, she started mentioning to us her silverware was suddenly and inexplicably going missing. She was getting frustrated. tried to blame one of us for playing a practical joke on her. One that she didn't find funny. Neither my dad or I would dare think of playing tricks on her. We assured her that we had no involvement in the disappearances and helped her look for them, but no luck. At first it was one of the 2 knives, until she was actually down to only 1 knife left. It was weird as fuck. These were silverware knives, not the big ones for food prep. Her quote-unquote obsession with the missing knives grew to the point that she started questioning the few neighbors that we had. Of course, none of them had been in her kitchen, so they got plenty annoyed by her suspicion. We had to apologize to them on her behalf. She was just pissed off. Fortunately, my dad made enough trips to Goodwill until he found a very similar knife pattern and brought them as replacements. When my folks finally bought a house and everything in the kitchen was getting packed for moving, we gave the kitchen a deep cleaning, and what turned up? The knives from the original set. But they were in the strangest place ever, behind the drawer in which she kept cloth napkins and trivets. This was a whole 2-drawer below where she kept her silverware. Why there? I don't know. None of us knew. In my opinion, for those damn knives to end up there, had to be some kind of ghostly mischief. None of us would ever think to put them there. That old apartment always had a kind of strangeness. Me and my cousin heard a church bell inside our room. This is a story that happened back in 2015. Freaks me out to this day. For context, me, a 25-year-old male, and my cousin, 26, go to our grandma's house every school and uni break since we were kids. We stay there pretty much doing nothing and having fun playing video games. We always share a bedroom when we're there, and we both have our own beds. I was 15 and he was 16 at the time, and none of us were having sleep paralysis. This one night, we both went to bedroom around midnight, closed the door, and fell asleep. Sometime later, my cousin got up to pee, left the room, and went to the bathroom, causing me to wake up because of the lights. Checked my phone, and it was around 2:30 a.m. He came back, closed the door, and laid on his back. And that's when it started. Keep in mind that I was 100% awake at this point, as I had woken up from him opening and closing the door. By the time he laid on his bed, this really deep-toned and steady-paced church bell started ringing really loud inside our bedroom near our beds. I was listening to it and I freaked the fuck out, and all I could do was cover my head with blankets and stay there trying to hide myself. A few seconds later, that fucking bell started to wander around the room, moving in all directions, up and down, moving all over my bed and all around the whole bedroom. I'm not sure how long this lasted, but it felt like an eternity. And then started moving toward the door. I got out of the bedroom into the living room. The bedrooms of the house are right next to the living room, then headed to the back of the house and disappeared. The direction it was going was clear to me as it was getting lower and lower until it just disappeared. I have no idea where this came from and where it went to, or even what it was. After it was gone, I honestly didn't have enough courage to say anything. I just stayed there quiet. So did my cousin, and needless to say, I didn't get any sleep. The next day when I woke up, I asked if he heard the bell, and he said, yeah, exactly like I did. To this day, this is an experience that creeps the hell out of us, and we have no explanation for what happened. True story. About 12 years ago, I moved into my house. It's an upper masonette. It was built around the turn of the century, I think 1910 or thereabouts. When I first moved in, I lived with my brother, we began to notice some strange things. Firstly, windows that we swore would be closed would be wide open. Not that strange. Mistakes can be made, but it happened so often that we decided to do an experiment. We closed and locked every window in the house, then took a bus into town. We spent a few hours shopping and then came home. When we got back, all the windows were unlocked and wide open, and a stack of plates from the kitchen cupboard were on the counter. The phenomena continued. Wet handprints appeared on the ceiling in the kitchen and bathroom. Handprints appeared on the outside of the windows. And not long after, blood started to appear on the floors and walls. It ranged from splashes where it looked like it had been flung to small pools on tables and on the floor. Once my brother's partner's train tickets home that were in his wallet turned up in the living room floor in a small pool of blood. We absolutely could not explain what was happening. A friend of ours who is a nurse at the Royal Victorian Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne took a swab of the fluid, confirmed that it was indeed human type A blood. Once when my brother and I were watching television in the living room, we could smell smoke. It took us a long time to discover that the underside of our dining room table was on fire. No flames, but the wood was smoldering, a red-hot ember. We had to turn the table over and cover it with wet cloths before really going to bed. The blood continued to materialize at regular intervals, and we also started to discover some purposeful placement. In opening the bathroom cupboard, there would be stacks of jars and bottles of shampoo and cosmetics, balanced so precariously that a touch would cause them to collapse. One morning I woke up and found every knife from the cutlery drawer in the fridge. By this point, my brother and I had moved out, and we decided to call a priest. Fortunately, he seemed quite disinterested and said he could only offer the same blessing he would bestow on any new home. The phenomena did not stop. In fact, it got more frequent. He sent an email to the Society for Psychical Research, but received no reply. At last, my mother, who's a very devout woman, said she knew of a priest who was mandated to deal with these sorts of things. I contacted him, and funnily enough, when he arrived, I recognized him. He had baptized my friend's eldest daughter, and also said Mass at the school that I attended. He assured me that whatever was happening was not dangerous, and I could not be harmed. He went from room to room with holy water, much as one might imagine. Then he held my hand and sang a prayer which I believe was improvised. Before he left, he stuck a piece of laminated paper above my kitchen door that bears just a series of letters and numbers. I have no idea what they mean. He wouldn't take any money from me. We shook hands and he left. There's never been any activity since then. Not really a thrilling tale, but a true one.